Thanksgiving at the McClure house always ran like clockwork. Noon sharp meant the turkey was carved, the sweet potatoes went bubbling onto the table, and Uncle Frank parked himself in front of the television with a beer in hand like it was his sacred duty. The TV itself was practically an heirloom, an ancient, wood-paneled box with knobs that stuck and a screen that bulged outward just enough to give every image a permanent fishbowl effect. Everyone complained about it year after year. Everyone also knew not to touch it. Frank would say, "This TV has been here since the Lions' first Thanksgiving win in '62, and it's gonna be here till the last drumstick's gone." By 2 o'clock, the McClures had assembled in the den. Cousins sprawled on the shaggy carpet. Grandma Dooley knitted from her armchair, needles clacking like nervous insect legs. Aunt Cheryl carried in pie after pie, muttering about how the whipped cream was going flat. "Kickoff in 5 minutes," Frank hollered, fiddling with the rabbit ear antenna until the screen shifted from snowy static to the fuzzy but familiar glow of the football Thanksgiving broadcast. The family erupted in the usual squabbles. The kids bickered about who got the good couch cushions. Cousin Megan rolled her eyes, whispering about how barbaric football was compared to, let's say, chess. Grandma reminded everyone, again, that she once dated a Green Bay Packer, though no one could ever remember which one. Outside, the November wind rattled the bare trees, but inside the den, the warmth of turkey, stuffing, and tradition hung thick as gravy. Frank leaned back in his recliner with a satisfied sigh. "Best seat in the house," he said. "Nothing like football and family." The game flickered to life. The announcers' voices filled the room, tinny and cheerful. The crowd roared through the speakers. For a moment, everything was perfectly, predictably normal. But as the camera zoomed in on the players huddled on the field, the TV gave a strange hiccup, like a skipped heartbeat. The screen pulsed. A faint ripple ran across it. No one noticed. Not yet. The kickoff soared into the sky, the ball a dark speck against the gray November clouds. The players thundered down the field, helmets glinting under stadium lights. And then, pop, the screen hiccuped again. For a split second, the picture doubled, blurred, then sharpened into something strange. "Touchdown," one of the announcers shouted with enthusiasm. The camera cut to a running back barreling through defenders, diving into the end zone. The family cheered, until Uncle Frank barked, "Hold up. That didn't happen yet." Everyone blinked. On the field, the teams were still lined up for the first play. The ball hadn't even been snapped. "Must be a replay," Cousin Megan said, smirking. They probably glitched the feed. But 30 seconds later, the exact same play unfolded. The same running back, the same dive into the end zone, the same roar from the crowd. "See?" Frank said, pointing his finger like he'd just won an argument. "I told you." Nobody had an answer. Grandma Dooley squinted at the screen, her knitting needles frozen in midair. "How can it be a replay," she asked, "if it hasn't happened yet?" The kids laughed nervously, brushing it off as a network mistake. But then it happened again. A penalty flashed on the screen. False start. The announcers explained which player jumped early. The yellow flag graphic rippled across the bottom corner. 10 seconds later, down on the field, a ref tossed his flag. Same penalty, same player, same words from the announcers, down to the pause in their voices. "Deja vu," muttered Aunt Cheryl, clutching her pie plate a little too tightly. The room went quiet. Nobody wanted to admit it out loud, but every single person in that den was thinking the same thing. The TV wasn't showing the game. It was showing the future. By the middle of the second quarter, the family was trying their best to act normal. Uncle Frank kept insisting it was just time delay magic, and that networks did stuff like this all the time. No one believed him, but they let him rant because arguing with Frank was as much a Thanksgiving tradition as pumpkin pie. Then the announcers' voices shifted. And what a catch that was, just like Tommy catching that turkey leg before it hit the floor. Every head in the room swiveled toward 7-year-old Tommy, who sat cross-legged on the rug, gnawing a drumstick. He froze mid-bite. What? Did they just say?" Aunt Cheryl sputtered, but the announcers plowed on, cheerful as ever. "And don't spill that cranberry sauce, Margaret. You worked too hard for that." Grandma Dooley gasped. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, ladling cranberry sauce into a bowl. Her hand trembled so badly she nearly dropped it. The room went pin-drop silent, except for the drone of the game. Uncle Frank muted the TV. The announcers' voices cut off. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. And then, through the speakers, without sound being on, the announcers chuckled. "Don't mute us, Frank. We're only getting started." Frank's face drained of color. His hand jerked away from the remote like it had burned him. The TV flickered, static crawling along the edges of the screen. The picture wobbled, then sharpened again. On the field, the quarterback called a play. But the announcers weren't talking about football anymore. "This family loves tradition," one of them said. "Year after year, the same turkey, the same stuffing, the same game on the same TV. Isn't that right, folks?" The camera panned across the stadium crowd, but for a split second, it didn't look like strangers at all. It looked like the McClure family. Grandma in her chair, the kids sprawled on the carpet, Uncle Frank with his beer, staring at himself on screen. The family sat frozen, watching themselves watching the game. The family stared at the screen, silent. Nobody moved, nobody even breathed too loudly. On the TV, the game marched on, but something had changed. The players no longer looked quite right. Their eyes, behind the glare of their face masks, seemed too dark. Not shaded, not in shadow, just empty. Their movements grew jerky, almost puppet-like, as if their limbs weren't connected properly. "Look at the crowd," Megan whispered. The camera panned the stadium. Thousands of people clapping and cheering, except when you looked closely, they weren't really moving. Their faces were pale, blurred, as though they'd been smeared by static. Rows upon rows of open mouths, cheering soundlessly, eyes hollow and glassy. The announcers' voices softened, dropping into a low hum between plays. "Don't turn it off. Not yet. Not while the game is still being played." Uncle Frank gripped the arm of his recliner so hard his knuckles went white. "It's just a bad feed," he said, but his voice shook. The screen flashed suddenly, like lightning inside the TV. For a split second, the camera zoomed in not on the players, but on the living room itself. The McClures, caught in grainy black and white, frozen mid-gasp. Then back to the field, as if nothing had happened. Little Tommy whimpered, "They saw us." The next play snapped into motion. The quarterback dropped back to throw. The ball spiraled into the air. A wide receiver leapt to catch it and slammed to the ground with a bone-snapping crack that made half the family flinch. The announcers didn't call the play. They just chuckled. "Looks painful, doesn't it? Almost as painful as Cheryl's poor thumb." Aunt Cheryl yelped. She dropped the pie plate she'd been holding, clutching her hand. A jagged red line ran across her thumb, as though she'd sliced it open on something sharp, except there'd been nothing in her hand but a plate. The family scrambled, panicked, offering her napkins, pressing ice from the cooler. Nobody dared look at the TV. But the announcers kept talking. "Don't ignore us. The game's only halfway through." The den felt smaller now, as though the walls had drawn in closer. No one touched their plates. No one even whispered. Only the TV filled the silence, humming like a live wire. On screen, the broadcast scoreboard glowed bright across the top corner. But beneath the usual numbers, a new row flickered to life. Letters formed in pixelated static. The McClure family names. Tommy, Cheryl, Megan, Frank, Grandma. One by one, every person in the room appeared in sharp white letters. "What the hell is this?" Frank muttered, leaning forward. The game reset on the field. Kickoff. The ball soared. The receiver caught it, sprinted downfield, juking left and right. He made it 30 yards before fumbling. The ball tumbled loose, and right on cue Tommy's drumstick slipped from his greasy fingers and hit the carpet. The little boy yelped like he'd been shoved. The scoreboard flickered. Next to Tommy, -1 point. Gasps rattled through the room. "It's keeping score of us," whispered Megan. Her voice was tight, not mocking this time. The next play began. The quarterback threw wide. The receiver caught it clean, 20 yards, 30, bam, tackled hard to the ground. On the carpet, Cousin Luke shrieked and clutched his shoulder. No one had touched him, but a deep red bruise spread under his sweater. The scoreboard updated. Next to Luke, -7 points. "No, no, no, no," Aunt Cheryl whispered, still cradling her bleeding thumb. The announcers laughed, their voices oily and sweet. "Fumble, fracture, foul, every play has a price. That's how the game is played." Another pass. Another brutal tackle. This time, the scoreboard showed Frank, -10 points. Uncle Frank gasped and doubled over, his beer clattering to the floor. His face flushed red, breath ragged. Heartburn, he wheezed, but his hand pressed against his chest. Just heartburn. The scoreboard kept glowing, merciless, waiting for the next play. Grandma Dooley dropped her knitting into her lap, her old hands trembling. "It's not a game anymore," she whispered. "It's us." The McClures erupted into chaos. "Turn it off," Aunt Cheryl shrieked, clutching her thumb in a wad of napkins. Yank the cord, Megan barked, already half rising from the couch. Uncle Frank staggered to his feet, clutching his chest with one hand and waving the remote with the other. I'm trying. He mashed every button. Mute, power, volume, but the screen only grew brighter. The scoreboard shimmered like molten metal, the family names glowing with each flicker of static. Just turn it off, Cheryl screamed. Frank lunged for the plug. He yanked the cord free of the wall with a sharp snap. The room plunged into darkness. For one glorious second, relief washed over them until the TV flared back to life, unplugged, humming louder than before. The announcers chuckled. You can't quit before the final whistle. The static rolled across the screen, spilling like fog into the den. A sharp buzzing filled the air, rattling everyone's teeth. The smell of ozone stung their noses, as if lightning had struck indoors. Smash it, Megan cried. She grabbed a heavy bookend shaped like a turkey and hurled it at the screen. The object struck dead center. Instead of shattering, the glass rippled, like she'd thrown it into water. The bookend disappeared, the TV swallowed it whole. The family froze in horror. On the field, the camera panned to the sideline. There, lying motionless on the turf, was a player in uniform. His helmet rolled free, clattering across the grass, and in place of the player's face was the carved brass head of a turkey, the bookend. Grandma clapped her hand over her mouth. The announcers spoke again, their voices gleeful. Everything offered is accepted. The game must go on. The scoreboard pulsed. Another play began. The family huddled together, breathing hard, as the air around them thickened, pressing down like a weight. It felt harder to move, harder to think, as though the room itself was tilting toward the glowing television. Grandma's knitting yarn unspooled across the floor, trailing toward the screen like it was being pulled in. And then, with a hiss of static, the announcers declared, "Final quarter. Time to finish what you started." The den felt like it was breathing, every wall pulsing with static light from the television. The air hummed, heavy and sharp, like the inside of a storm cloud. On screen, the scoreboard no longer showed football numbers. It listed only the McClures. Their names, their scores, each one glowing faintly, waiting for the final play. "Somebody's gotta do it," Megan whispered. Her voice trembled. "Somebody's gotta turn it off." "No one touches that thing," Cheryl snapped, clutching her injured hand. But the announcers answered for them, their voices booming now, filling the whole house. One last drive. One last chance. Winner takes all. The camera cut to the quarterback. He crouched under center, face mask tilted forward, staring directly into the McClures' living room. His eyes were bottomless shadows. His lips moved in time with the announcer's words. "Don't you dare forfeit." The snap came. The ball flew. Players crashed together in a blur of static and violence. Every helmet slammed like a thunderclap. The den shook with each hit, picture frames rattling on the walls. Frank gritted his teeth and staggered forward, every step like wading through molasses. The static clawed at his skin, pulling him back. He forced himself closer, until he stood inches from the glowing screen. The final pass spiraled across the field. The receiver stretched for it, fingertips brushing leather, and Frank slammed his hand against the TV's power switch. Darkness. Silence. The static cut out like a severed nerve. The McClures collapsed into the quiet, panting, trembling, surrounded only by the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of Grandma's knitting needles hitting the floor. The TV sat black and lifeless. But its screen reflected not the den, not the family, not anything behind them. It reflected a stadium, empty seats, a dark field, waiting for next year. No one spoke. Finally, Uncle Frank cleared his throat, his voice raw. "Maybe it's time we get a new TV." He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and squinted at the glowing screen. "Looks like Best Buy's got a Black Friday deal." Nobody laughed. Not really. Just a few nervous chuckles. The den was silent again. And from the TV's dead screen, faint but certain, came the soft sound of a referee's whistle. Before we lose the signal, make sure you hit that like button. It helps keep the channel stable. And if you subscribe, maybe the broadcast will find you next time. Stay tuned, and whatever you do, don't change the channel.